So hi, Mark. Now let's talk about MicroFrontends, JSF, JavaScript, and web.
Good morning again.
Good morning again.
The second part.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in the previous blog podcast, we kind of talked about microservices and how they kind of behave and how we treat them on the backend level. But we didn't talk about how we do frontend for those, because all the backends are neat, but except you're doing batches and stuff like that, you also need a frontend for it.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of Angular, some Vue.js, some Vaadin projects, and I still have a few oldish JSF applications. And funnily, while JSF2 is actually not that modern, and people kind of say, "Ooh, this is so old technology," it, in my eyes, appears to be the best fit for modularized backends, because you can have a deep link to another application, and all those kind of backend servers or self-contained systems which have backend modularized, be it microservices or a little bit fatter, and their UI. And they all use the same CSS, the same images, the same styling, and a single sign-on. And you kind of, the user don't even see that they are actually switching applications, because it appears to be one big applications. And the company could add a server with an additional functionality, just add them to the menu, which is kind of globally maintained via a database or LDAP or whatever. And then you have a new part of the application with a completely different development and deployment lifecycle, and it's just kind of integrated via deep links. And for the user, it appears to be one big application, but actually it's 15 different servers.
Yeah.
And how do you do the same with Angular, with Vue.js, with Vaadin?
Yeah. So first, Java server
every
faces.
time you have the JavaScript loading kringle.
Yeah. Java server faces, JSF. First, even in startups, we use JSF, and JSF, in my eyes, is one of the most productive technologies out there, and this is especially for people who don't like, or don't have lots of knowledge about web. But even then, what you get in JSF for free is data binding between client on server for free, and even data validation in browser and on the server without any code duplication for free. And but JSF has two problems. The problems are not technical, rather than organizational or people problem. First, in most large companies, what happened before was an architect decided which JSF components have to be used, or prime faces back then, rich faces, ice faces. We had lots of faces, the my faces, and the users never saw actually the components. And the problem was that the users, the end users, wanted to have something different, and they didn't know the limits about the JSF from the JSF components. And what happened then is developers were forced to provide functionality. Let's say for a table, let's say table with a column with a tree view, and such a functionality was not available out of the box. And now there was no one in the project who said to the end user, "Look, this is now how it works. Take it or leave it." So either we use the JSF component or not. So they then forked the components, had to know to change the Java source code plus the emitting or the generation of CSS and JavaScript. And this is beginning of the end. If you do this, you are forking the whole suite of components, and on the next release, you have basically a fork, and it is way too expensive. So this was the first problem. The next problem of JSF, no problem. This is now architectural consideration. JSF is a server-centric framework, so it means it runs entirely on the server, and it generates the code or the HTML pages which run in a browser. And this is very good for forms-based or flows wizards but you cannot write offline applications. And what we do in projects, sometimes we need something like Swing or JavaFX in a browser. And in this particular cases, we write the code with JavaScript, which runs in a browser and communicates with the backend via JAX-RS, REST, and JSON. So there is, it looks like almost like, microservice to microservice communication, but in this case, a browser communicates with the backend.
A funny thing. we once have been in a big company, and they kind of they decided to use Vaadin, which is okay-ish technology. And their main argument was, first, with Vaadin, you don't have to know HTML, and this is completely correct. But the second argument was, well, our servers, they don't have to deal with it, and JSF is so expensive on the servers. And this argument is completely bonkers.
Yes.
Because, of course, JSF used to be expensive, but MyFaces push the boundaries so much, and Mohara also is now so much better and lighter on the server, and the server got stronger. So it's no problem to serve 50,000 users on one server. And the fun thing is that they're now having Vaadin, and if we kind of looked at how their whole architecture is, then they had kind of Microsoft Terminal servers, and all the clerks, the 10,000 clerks, just have thin clients. They connect to the server, and so instead of having one JSF application on the backend, they now have a Vaadin backend, which kind of serves JavaScript, and the JavaScript runs on the terminal servers, which is also the centralized servers again. And you know that the CPU, the load on CPUs for rendering a JSF page is kind of 5 milliseconds, and building this in Microsoft EA Internet Explorer is kind of a second of JavaScript execution for each and every page, which is really terrible on the CPU.
No, so I mean, this JSF on the server should consume CPU and memory, and if the team is faster, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter. So the whole discussion that JSF, consumes CPU. I mean, everything consumes CPU, and the server-side rendering with React and Angular with Node will consume even more CPU than JSF consumes. So, I mean, this is like the discussion is just forget it. But where JSF was extremely successful in project was what I did is I showed them client before we started. So client, the users, showcase. So they got, prime phases, showcase, a demo. I say, look, just take the components and they are available as they are. There will be no modifications. And if we take that and implement application with it, we will be extremely productive. No other, we can change the color, we can change the font, but we cannot change how it works. And then
you can also add custom components. It's not that much effort, but I would not suggest to fork like prime phases and add additional functionality, except you are contributing to prime phases, which is completely valid. Thomas and Raschko from Germany, for example, is now one of the number one prime phases contributors, because he just didn't fork it in-house. He contributed back.
Exactly. This is different. This is completely different, but this never happens in my business project. And we already talk how my typical project looks like. So there will be mission impossible to convince my client to contribute prime phases code back. It wouldn't work. So what it means, even with startups, what we often have back office applications written in JSF, because they just, copy and paste CRUD. We get, you can write in 3 days the whole back office thing. And if we would like to push the boundary, what's possible in the web, we use JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, because you cannot do this with a framework which has prepared components. It's just impossible. So the JSF for me is just code generation of HTML, and there are limits which is possible. And more, we have to be more flexible, and this is okay. And offline possibility. So what also happens?
That's okay.
We write HTML applications, HTML5 applications, which can operate completely offline without the server. So this happens also more. So we don't write native code to Android and iOS. We have one HTML5 app which works everywhere, and it looks reasonable. It is not no perfect iOS app, but it's good enough.
So no kind of native client apps?
No. And my approach in the front end is exactly the same as in the backend. Sometimes I tell the people this is Java-istic approach to front end, and I have to say you will love it. So what I'm doing, so the last 2 years, 3 years, you could actually write in front end in browser JavaScript code which looks like Java. It is so similar that if I spend too much time in the front end, I have problems to write Java code, because in Java we have the thin arrow lambda function and the JavaScript fat arrow. In JavaScript, if you have an array, you can do map and filter without the stream. And in Java, I have to say, array.stream.map. Also, it's very, very similar. And what we do to my clients, I don't use any framework. So I had the first time in my life I spoke at JavaScript conference. It was IJS, International JavaScript Conference in Munich. This was just, I was interested actually what happens. I did something like, the title was like building progressive web apps without frameworks. And of course, the whole JavaScript conference talked about frameworks. And my room was full, and the people were amazed. How much can you achieve without frameworks? This is what I really did. I thought it would be a disaster. So my talk, but it worked well. What we are doing is we just use web standards. And what web standards are is basically very similar to JCP, what we have or what we had. And this is basically whatever you can find in MDN, Mozilla Developer Network. This is such a web standard. And the cool story is, if you search, for instance, now an MDN in Google and let's say fetch, you will find a Java doc-like API of the web standard. What my Java developers really like or love even, they say, okay, cool, now we have no CDLI. There's one standard which will never change and we can just use it. And to structure such applications, we use so-called web components. What this basically is?
Yeah, I know this. Polymer.
No. Polymer is forbidden, of course. We use native web components. So it means it looks like class, let's say class drink view extends HTML element. And this is the web component. And then you say custom elements define, and you give the name of the tag. And the point is, you don't need Polymer anymore. The web components are available in all browsers on Earth. So it's absolutely, except Opera Mini or whatever. So, and we structured the whole system with these web components. And we, on developer machines, there is no tricks, NPM. We don't need NPM, nothing. We just use browser and JavaScript. And modules, for instance, come out of the box. So there is So we have no framework.
To pure HTML, basically.
Yeah, what we did 20 years ago. Exactly the discussion we know with distribution is pure HTML, but the HTML is semantic. So we have nice tags, and the name of the text is name of the component. So it looks pretty much like a well-written Swing or JavaFX applications, but just with JavaScript. So it's actually no difference. And the tags look like, let's say, what is your name of a company? I forgot it. You have a company, right?
I'm working for a company right now. Yeah, Rise.
Rise,
yeah. R-I-S-E.
Then would be R minus or R dash view, because the web components have to have, always the dash to not to have collisions with the standard text. Yeah. So it'd be R view, R nav, R customer, R client. So you structure semantically the whole thing. And then you can, with CSS3, you can, depending on, the resolution or whatever you have, you say it is landscape mode or portrait mode, you can rearrange afterwards all the tags. And this happens with CSS grid, which is very, very similar to grid back layout, something like this. This is nicer than grid back layout, but is as mighty as powerful.
Is CSS grid now a functionality of the CSS standard? I know CSS 960.
In all browsers, it is available everywhere. So so we don't have no Bootstrap, no Foundation, no Angular. And Angular, I kill Angular in projects, most of my projects, because what you have to know, Angular follows semantic versioning, and they have 2 major releases a year. So potentially they can introduce a small breaking changes. And right now I have, actually yesterday I also performed a code review of a front-end project. It was written in Angular 5. Now we have Angular 9, but the project I think is 1 year in production or something like this. 170 security risks because it was not upgraded, for instance. So, and the cool story is in my world. So what we are doing is there will be no migrations because we just use web standards and they will never change. And this is really easy to learn. I have some screencasts in my YouTube channel if you like. So this is like it is really fun. And people ask me then why you need frameworks, and you need frameworks for very specific cases, but you can absolutely build such a business application with just plain JavaScript ES6. This is the name, and there is ES7 and ES8, but there are two new. ES6 is available in all browsers. CSS3 is available in all browsers, so we just go the web standards way.
ECMAScript 6, yeah.
This is actually old. And now to MicroFrontends. Now comes the trick, because you asked me what we do, how to compose such a thing. It's a funky story in JavaScript. They have so-called modules, which basically are imports statements in Java. So you can say import, and something, which was exported from a file. And in browser, you can say import, let's say, a customer component from, and you specify a relative path to the JavaScript file. What's cool, you can use URIs for that. So what we can do, our application can load from different HTTP servers parts dynamically, and this is called now MicroFrontends. So this is the new term, but this is just loading, just composing a larger applications from parts, and these parts can come. They can communicate with different microservices. So there is no clear one-to-one relation between microservice and such a component. So usually there is, but it doesn't have to be.
That sounds promising. So you also don't. Well, one of the biggest issue I see with kind of this interconnect, or the link between going from one kind of application to the other, is that you always have to load the JavaScript from the other server, and then you have the loading kringle and the sandbox spinning a second. And this, I guess, you don't have this anymore, since you don't load anything from the server, and you just use native browser resources or browser functionality.
Exactly, and this gets even better because we don't have this NPM build. We don't have a huge JavaScript file, so we don't overtax the client with 1 huge megabyte JavaScript file. And so before I explain this in a detail, you mentioned Vardin. We use absolute Vardin in my projects, but not this Vardin it's called Vardin components. So if you search for Vardin components, you will find Vardin web standard custom elements, which you can use without the Java part. So for instance, I will have in my application, so we are not crazy. We are not building tables by ourselves, date pickers or whatever. So we can pick and choose whatever we like from the web. So we can, for instance, we use Vardin tables because they are very powerful. So we have Vardin table usually. They are virtual scrolling, and this is if you search, go to Vardin. It's called Vardin Grid. So you get the Vardin stuff, and this is one tag from Vardin. This is a HTML tag, and behind that there are custom events. So you can react to these events, and there's an API where you can access the table. So you can select, you can has renderers, so very similar to Swing actually, or Swing tables. And SAP, there's a UI5 framework for SAP. They made available open source version of the framework as web components again. For instance, they have great date picker from SAP. So we have a date picker with, so we don't have to write it by ourselves. And now comes the cool part. Because we don't have any magic, we just use with browser DOM, we can actually reuse all the jQuery components. There are millions of them, like tables with filtering, grouping. So we pick whatever we like. We've wrapped the proprietary jQuery widget with a web component, and we are ready to go. And I had to work with jQuery developers, and they love it because now there's no virtual DOM, no diffing, nothing. They just they know a lots of stuff, and I say, okay, whatever you can do it in this component, and they do in this component. This is local. Now,
and you kind of provide this on a kind of static HTTPD Apache web server.
Yes.
And they get shared by all the applications in your company.
Yes. And now comes the cool part. So because in a project we say, okay, we have date picker from SAP, we have the Vardin table from somewhere else. And we have like a very lightweight template engine. This is the reminder from Polymer. It's called lit HTML. This is like it is a more secure templating way with data binding. So this is like 500 lines of JavaScript. So it's not like, a framework. It's more like a library. And
what's the name of it?
Lit HTML. There's lit-HTML. It's a part of Polymer. And the other one is called Hyper HTML. There are lots of such libraries. And what they are, in JDK 13 we get multi-line strings, like
yes,
yeah, and this is available in JavaScript, and this is called string literal. So you have a multi-line strings, and you can prepend. This is not possible in Java. In JavaScript, a name before the string, and then like a template processor kicks in. You can write your own template processor.
Oh, okay.
And there are two built in. This is like the lit HTML from Google and Hyper HTML from different. This is an open source project, lit HTML as well, but they are standalone open source project. And there are lots of such template engines. I pick one from Google because it's Google, and we are not really depending on it, but we are using this. The cool story is there is a build tool in JavaScript. It's called Rollup.js, and with that tool we can create from all these independent components we are using in one project, one major JavaScript file with so-called chunks. So whatever is, not one. So we can use, for instance, Vaadin and the date picker from SAP and Vaadin. And it could happen that the date picker and the Vaadin stuff have the same common component, let's say Moment.js, which does dates. So the Rollup.js will recognize that and create chunks which are reusable. So we get multiple JavaScript files which will point to the same file. Now, and what's cool, we package everything and put on our own server and provide a version for it. So it says, okay, this is in my, Mark framework version 1. And all my web services now point to this version 1 from our web server. And now magic happens. The cool story is the browser will cache that. The cool story is now, because this is unique URI, and we don't need anything locally. So we don't have NPM, no framework, nothing. So this is basically what we are doing, and this explodes right now. So I get more and more requests in this direction, and my clients are sick of migrating, between frameworks back and forth.
I understand this. And the CSS or the view or the visualization is only changed by like changing colors and so on. It's just applied by CSS,
yes.
And you're done.
Yes. The markup is very simple, and only CSS is allowed. And we use two layouts managers. One is called CSS Grid, and then it says Flex layout. Flex is unidimensional, and Grid is multidimensional. And what you can do with Grid is you can have like how it's called, grid template arrays. This is the name. So you can have logical grid. I can say I have no details. It's called like nav footer, nav section, nav header, and then you get nav on the left side. But I can say header, nav content, footer, and then the nav only is in this array. So you can very easily rearrange the whole thing without changing the markup. And the cool story is, you will like it even more, we have Shadow DOM. And what Shadow DOM means is every component can decide to be private. So you can do whatever you like in the Shadow DOM, and you cannot outbreak. So if you have breakout, so if you are in the Shadow DOM and you do whatever CSS you do inside, you cannot destroy the layout from the whole application. So this is basically web standards, yeah. And the web standards for me, this web standards sounds like JCP or whatever, but this is whatever we find in MDN and Mozilla Developer Network. This is the name of that. Samsung, Microsoft, Google, Mozilla agreed that this is the canonical resource, which is also machine readable. So they provide, I think in JSON, there's a whole API. This is the browser standards from all vendors, which is perfect. So I would say for Java developer is golden age right now. And whatever JavaScript does is very well explainable with Java. For instance, JavaScript has promises. I can explain them to Java developers as futures. This is one-to-one. JavaScript says web workers is very similar to message-driven beans in Java EE. So there's one-to-one relation.
That sounds really, really cool.
Yeah.
And I have no idea about all this area. I'm such a backend guy.
No problem. So
Okay.
we can have no more Java user group meeting somewhere in Vienna or whatever, and we can have one, session interfaces or not, and another one I will just hack on stage this, and we can talk about this if you like.
That would be really cool.
Mhm.
Okay, so.
Any questions left?
No, I don't think. I have to kind of go through this, and I wrote on a text pad. I kind of have about a page full of things I have to look up now.
Yeah, and this will be show notes as well. So I will provide the show notes, so you can also, take a look at the show notes.
Cool.
Okay, cool. Now I have to work.
Okay, then thanks again.
Thank you.
See you next time. Yeah?
Okay, bye.
Ciao.